Welcome to Wellsprings of Faith. My name is Father Jurgen Llias, and I'm an Anglican priest, the rector of Christ the Redeemer Anglican Church in Danvers, Massachusetts, and a resident here in the Melrose community. This program, Wellsprings of Faith, looks at religious faith, the difference it makes in a person's life and in the life of our world. I welcome today to our program Wendy Murray. She is an author, published 11 books, also has written frequently for Christianity Today, which is a wonderful evangelical periodical, and I suspect a lot of other places as well. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to Wellsprings of Faith.
Thank you.
Hey, I always like to have a conversation with my guests first about faith and their own faith journey before we kind of talk about what that's produced in terms of your life. But tell us a little bit about your own journey with the Lord.
Well, I can summarize it easily. At its inaugural moment, it was unsolicited and unexpected. I suppose I would call it a spontaneous conversion when I was 16 years old. I did not grow up in a family that was a church-going family, religious in any way. And I was...
What happened?
Oh, I don't think we have time for that in this show. Ultimately, the background of my conversion was the confluence of many profound sadnesses I was experiencing at the time, probably most particularly the alcoholism that had gripped my father. And it was destroying our family, it was destroying me. I also had an injury that damaged one of my knees, and I had kind of defined myself athletically.
That's right. I remember you telling me that one time when we were having lunch together.
Yeah, right, with the joint issues.
Your whole sense of I was going to be a great athlete. And
that's right, and that was gone. That was gone.
Wow.
And I was very depressed.
Yeah, I would think so. Sort of life at 16, getting stripped away already.
Yep. Right, it's just, I was starting to bloom.
Yeah, right, puberty and everything.
Yeah, but it was really the weight of the grief from my father's alcoholism that shattered everything inside me. The knee accident was just kind of a catalyst for the implosion, the internal implosion I experienced. But interestingly, a moment happened in the wake of all of this. I had a cast on my leg from this is back in the day before you used the air, inflatable. It was plaster from the toe to my hip, and I just was a lost human being. And as typical of teenage girls, I was crying, moping.
Teenage boys cry too. I want you to know that.
Well, I hope they feel the freedom to do that. But interestingly, in an inexplicable way, the presence of Jesus Christ came into my consciousness. I didn't even have a Bible.
You didn't even ask for it.
No, I did not ask. I wasn't asking. I wasn't seeking. I wasn't praying. I was crying.
And when did you know it was Jesus?
Yeah, I did.
And what made you know it was Jesus?
I don't know.
No, you don't know. It was
I guess he just made it known.
He said, "I'm here. I'm here."
Somehow I knew it was Jesus, and I had no Bible.
Yeah.
So I looked Jesus up in the World Book Encyclopedia. That was the beginning of my life journey in faith.
Wow.
Yeah, that was at the age of 16.
Oh, that's amazing. What a wonderful
So it's been,
it's
been many, many decades. It's defined my life, for better or for worse.
There is that, I think of it so often, and obviously being a preacher, that expression Jesus says to his own disciples the night before his death, you did not choose me, I chose you. And there's often this, and people do make choices about these things, but the sense sometimes of this sovereign act of God that reaches down and comes into our life and grabs us.
I'm compelled to add a footnote to that story. That was in February of 1972.
Wow.
April 2nd of 1972, 6 weeks later, if that, my father was delivered from alcoholism.
Wow.
And he had had many, many, many unsuccessful attempts to the point where I was completely cynical. Even at this point, I didn't believe it.
Yeah, it was going to
last. But he was.
Wow.
Within 6 weeks of that spontaneous conversion, he never had another drink to the day he died.
Wow.
So that was a very powerful affirmation to me.
Did they ever become Christians, your parents?
My father did at the age of 70. No, I'm sorry, in his late 60s.
Really? What did they make of their little pubescent daughter getting religious?
My father was okay with it.
Yeah. I thought it was just
After
a nice
after his
hobby for a teenager.
Well, he.
Did you ever tell them what actually happened?
Oh yeah,
And
I
what-
told both my parents.
Yeah.
I was very excited
Yeah,
about
yeah,
it. My
sure.
mom was very hostile.
Wow.
Very
Yeah,
hostile.
yeah. But
Yeah.
you persisted in that.
Did I have a choice? I didn't have a choice.
Yeah,
Of course I did.
wow.
And my father was not threatened in the way that my mother was. It was somewhat mystified. I was, Jesus freak.
Yeah.
That would be troubling,
Yeah. yeah.
to any parent.
Yeah, this was the 70s. The Jesus movement was
yeah,
around
I
those
was
days.
very much part of the Jesus movement,
All right,
definitely.
all right,
yeah,
all right.
yeah.
Wonderful,
Very
wonderful.
wore it proudly.
Wonderful,
The
wow.
one way
Yeah.
instead of the peace. We were the one way. So.
I was doing the peace part.
Were you?
I was an old hippie.
Oh, good for you.
Student radical and all that. I was a
Yeah.
Christian too, but I wasn't evangelical
We
in
were on
those
the cutting
days.
edge.
Yeah. Anyway, so where did that go with your life?
Well, that's a very long story,
Yeah.
obviously, but my faith is still with me. It's intact. I've seen some very, very difficult, experiences that have been intertwined with where that took me. In
Yeah.
my life. Probably the most defining element of my life as a result of my conversion was my choice in college and also then after college to study at seminary. I wanted to somehow appropriate my faith in some sort of vocation.
So you and your husband went off to Gordon Conwell, and then he became a pastor. Were you thinking of becoming a pastor yourself?
Right, I was, right.
Were you actually ordained?
Uh-huh.
Oh, you were? What denomination were you ordained?
The
in?
American Baptist Churches,
Oh, so you're a Baptist minister, among other things.
among other things. I don't lay claim to it, but
Oh.
it did in fact, define a certain period in my
Did you
life.
actually minister as a clergy person, as they would say these
Yeah,
days? Oh,
I
interesting.
did.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, with after my husband and I finished at seminary, our first church was in New Jersey, and we were called as co-pastors.
Co-pastors. Oh, I somehow
So-
didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
But how did all that develop into becoming a writer?
Yeah, well,
That's what I'm
very
really interested
interesting.
in.
I'm a firm believer that our callings find us,
Yeah.
no matter what we do
Right.
in any other direction. And it was during the time that we were ministering in New Jersey that my little boys started to come home from school with interesting stories about the little town we lived in, their school teachers and things like that. And I just started to get an ear for these great, quirky people that we were living
Yeah.
amidst. And I thought, that'd make a great story. It was just the nose of a reporter
Yeah.
that I didn't even know I had. But I always was a writer. That's what got me through college and seminary. I could write anything.
And just in terms of your academic work.
Right.
But you enjoyed
right,
the writing.
Right,
and it was
right. I was
easy
able
and
to
it was
take
good.
these complicated.
But the idea of becoming a writer wasn't there. You
No,
just,
no,
like
never.
all of us, had to write.
Right, right,
to get-
right.
Okay,
right.
but this started.
But this triggered
Something.
something in me that was just almost voracious. It's like
so
I
what was
really.
the first thing you wrote that wasn't a paper?
It was about Mr. McCabe,
sermon.
my middle son's second grade teacher, who used to wave a flag when a little boy, whom I'll call Timmy, that's not his real name,
Yeah.
finished his homework, because Timmy never finished his homework.
Oh.
And when Timmy did, he would march around the classroom saying, "It is the Timmy is done parade."
Was that to make fun of him? Or
No,
that,
it
or
was
that
like, hey,
celebrating?
Timmy did
I mean,
his
it was
work.
affirming the kid,
It was
not
affirming-
mocking
of course,
him.
yeah.
Well, it could go either way.
Right, you're right. But no, so when my son was telling me that, I thought, this guy's incredible, because it's a man teaching these second graders, and they loved him. So I asked the local paper if I could interview him. I wrote a piece about him. The editor loved it. It was published. It was my first piece.
Oh, wonderful.
And I ended up writing regularly for that newspaper. And the editor took me under her wing and kind of compensated for the fact that I hadn't studied journalism, which actually I don't necessarily feel that's a mandate for people who go into journalism. Sometimes it's a handicap, actually. But
I never studied preaching, so.
yeah, well, there you go. Like I said, your calling finds you.
Yeah.
So
Really, journalism began to develop as a.
and I resigned from the church.
Ah.
I made the decision that this is really what I'm
Great.
called to do. It was a very difficult decision, because is there something ungodly about that? You ask yourself that. And
it's not. I mean, that is, of course, one of the
I ultimately
prejudices sometimes,
Yeah.
particularly in the evangelical world,
Right.
but also the Catholic world. We're all Christians, supposedly all have ministries, but somehow the only really good ministry
Right.
is to be ordained,
To be
a
the
priest or a
professional
minister
Christian.
or a missionary. But that's
No, I
completely
wrestled a
false.
lot with that.
Yeah.
And
So how did the thing unfold? When did you write your first book as opposed
well,
to?
my first book didn't come until I was long beyond that. We ended up, what gave me leapfrogging to the place where I wrote my first book, after the church we were serving in New Jersey, after that tenure had completed after about 4+ years, we had the opportunity to move to Honduras, Central America.
Oh.
And my husband at that time was the minister of the English-speaking church in Tegucigalpa, the capital city.
Yes.
And because of my, by this point, portfolio of news clippings of, you know, the local people in this little town we lived in.
Yeah, that was mainly what you did for a while.
I did,
Oh,
yeah, and it was great, actually.
Yeah.
There was a need at that time for a regional reporter for Time magazine, and I was recommended by a colleague of mine there in Honduras, with whom I worked on a local English newspaper in Honduras. She commended me to Time magazine, and they hired me.
Oh, so you jumped into
I
the
jumped right
work
into the big leagues.
Big time
Yeah, well,
journalism.
in Honduras, you know, big fish in a
Well,
small
but
pond.
still.
But yeah, I did a lot of work.
Ah.
That took me out frequently. We'll ultimately get to the various books I've written,
Yeah.
but it was during this period of time that the archaeologists in Copan, which is a town in western Honduras, very near Guatemala, where Maya ruins.
Yes.
There's a beautiful city-state of Maya ruins. It's called Copan. And the archaeologists kept discovering these incredible findings, one on top of the next. And Time kept sending me out.
So you were doing a lot of your reporting was on the archaeological stuff there.
Right. I got tours, and I was in tunnels and saw tombs.
Now you just wrote you
my
happened to
novel.
send me a postcard of your most recent book, which is that your first novel?
It's my first novel.
Oh, I was going to ask.
It was a huge
you, 'cause
transition.
all the other
from
books I've read have been
they've all been
nonfiction.
nonfiction.
Oh.
Right.
So this is your first novel on this sort of mystery novel in Honduras and Mayan stuff.
The Maya ruins.
I'll have to read it sometime. I'm hoping to go to Honduras.
There's actually a lot of cosmological and theological interplay in that novel.
Oh, good. We're actually sending a parishioner to Honduras to do missionary work in 2 weeks. I wonder how to connect the two of you. So just because you've been there.
Well, I lived there for 4 years and have been back many times for various reasons.
So let's go backwards again now. So you're basically a journalist and for magazines. I think I first encountered your stuff as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Christianity Today, which is sort of the foremost. It's sort of the Time magazine of the evangelical world, you might say.
It was at one point.
Yeah. But what was your first? You moved into books.
Right. Well, I wrote a cover story for Christianity Today on the class of or the class of 2000. My son was a freshman who was graduating in the year 2000, and I obviously was immersed in youth culture at that time, feeling it was it was a malignant, youth culture was a malignant force that parents had to be proactive in protecting their children from, not necessarily in a, fundamentalistic, isolationistic way, but and it's only gotten worse as time has gone on. But anyway, so I did all kinds of study and research on the forces shaping the youth that are coming of age in the second millennium. And I guess it's the third millennium. But anyway, that cover story elicited a lot of response. And when
that was still for Time.
No, that was for Christianity Today. Yeah. And University Press was real interested in having me turn that story into a book. So they signed me. That was my first book contract. It was about youth culture.
What was the name of that?
It's called Generation 2K.
Wow.
And
that did do well for you?
It did all right.
Now, was it soon after that you said you were, and it seems to be a connection with that and Columbine.
Well, Columbine, I wrote a significant book on Columbine. It wasn't my next book, but Columbine happened in 1999, and Christianity Today sent me out there to cover that. I was writing the Columbine article for Christianity Today. It was a cover story. It was a very emotionally charged story. It was very close to my own heart, since my own sons were the same age as many of the victims and the perpetrators. Got to know many, many families of those the young people who were lost. I got to know young people who were in the library during the
Wow.
rampage who were injured or paralyzed, lost limbs. Got to know just about everyone in the community. It was very, very taxing.
And what you do with all that in terms of the book?
Well, I wrote a
Have you
book
not
called The
read it?
Day of Reckoning. What's it called? The Day of Reckoning, a Columbine in the Search for America's Soul. And what I did with that book was I brought in the religious element of the whole phenomenon. What had happened? At first, there was this huge reaction to the fact that Cassie Bernal had been asked if she believed in God and then was shot in the head and all this. And then the controversy about that erupted. And the thing kind of devolved into a gun control issue and a gang issue and bullying and all that, all of which was all part of it.
Right.
But I did never try to avoid or to escape the reality that this was a religious phenomenon. The young men who perpetrated it cloaked it that way. They called it an apocalypse. They used very, very religious language.
And where'd that come from?
Their journals, their...
No, but where in them did it come from?
Oh.
I mean, what was going on?
I have no idea. They were lost. They didn't, I don't know. They were angry, isolated. They had been bullied, actually, at Columbine by, I think it was their junior year.
And what was sort of your thesis in the book, or just
Well,
narrating the religious language?
That we can't get away from the forces that drive us, either positively or negatively. And both of those were very much a part of what happened in that place. It was a very religious event. That was the thesis of the book.
That's neat.
Yeah.
Well, obviously we live in a culture that mocks the ideas of things like demons and the devil, but the